Phonic FM on 106.8 FM.
Little sister, where are all your comforts now? There's no one underneath the bed. Pretty flower, where can you be placed for now? You're already curling, and you say so. You're already spinning. Eager but timid, tears that hide your face for hours. One tail is where you want to be. Watched and waited. Words that never find your mouth. What are you doing here? It lingers so. What do you bring us here? I'm glad that you're so pretty. It makes you easy to love. It makes everyone so angry. It makes you easy to hate. And the words you speak so sweet. Birds on hearts of silence. Little sister, what's the meaning of your sorrow? What sea of tears lurks beneath your bed? Pretty darling, why'd you try to hide your presence? You know you want your moment, even so. You want your flawless moment. Thoughtful but careless, fears that shame you like a baby. Afraid of who you are and what you won't be. Willed and waiting, words that never find your mouth. Do you remember that frustration echoes on? Your body remembers that silence. I'm glad that you're so pretty. It will carry you and make everyone so happy and make you what you be. The words you speak so like a bird on
This is recorded and mixed on the 17th of June, and it's a sort of version of the drama hour That's to say, me coming in early on a Thursday before the Wild Show to cover for the Storyteller, or possibly to meet the Storyteller and have a conversation. But this is lockdown. I'm still in lockdown, and the Wild Show not possible. We Don't Know show not possible, because they don't really work without at least two people in the studio. So those are going to be happening later in the year. Not sure when. So this is like a 2-hour chunk put together, which may fit the Phonic schedule at some point. And I'm sort of thinking about it as Thursday between 8 and 10, though whether it is or not, I'm not sure. So what will happen? There's definitely a drama, which is the same one that I do every summer when I'm sitting in for the Storyteller. That's to say, News from the Sun, stories of J.G. Ballard from the Internet Archive. And then I'll do other ones. If this works at all, I'll do another show. I might do several over the summer. Won't be one a week, but it'll be some. And I think there's 6 stories on the Internet Archive. So having a wonderful time. I'll definitely do that again. It's a great summer drama event. And then also there's 2 chunks which are already on SoundCloud, revolving around Creative Commons. So some Grateful Dead music, and also a lot of at least 3 clips about the MOOC and what's happening online at this time. So that's about enough. I think there should be some music, and there is a new release from Smooth and Turrell, who normally would be touring the UK, and I would hope they'd get to Exeter in normal times.
Is it enough to get noticed? Enough to carry on? I can't see the reason you've been feeling so down so long. You're
Fade Away from Stratos Blue, and the opening track was just something from the playout system that I found, because I think this is following on from the playout system. When I'm sitting in for the Storyteller, I don't necessarily start at 8 o'clock, but this show will be 2 hours worth of clips from here and there. The next section I've already put on SoundCloud, and it's about Creative Commons and music, mostly Grateful Dead, and there'll be more about MOOCs and Creative Commons later on. Mostly Grateful Dead from the Internet Archive, which is still Creative Commons, has been for a while. It's from Barton Hall, Cornell, 1977, and there's also an advert, because the imaginaries are the market and the commons, so there will be an advert for the Grateful Dead during this sequence. But first of all, Minglewood Blues.
I was born in the desert, raised in the land. I was born in the desert, raised in the land. You see, all the passion, you still winning from the land. We're in Texas. Bust
And now an explanation of Creative Commons by Joanne Jacobs. This was recorded during Like Minds in Exeter in hang on a moment, in 2010, and I've put it as Creative Commons on YouTube, which you used to be able to re-edit, but I can't find out how to do it at the moment. There must be a way, but that's something that if anybody knows that, please get in touch. I am Will789GB on Twitter. That's one good way to find me.
Creative Commons. Well, Creative Commons came about in about 10 years ago now, actually, because of the fact that there were a lot of artists that actually did want to share their works beyond the scope of their work. So, for instance, if we were having a song, wants to be able to use it in another context, say for instance as background music in a film. At the moment you actually have to renegotiate rights with the publishing house. Now, that's a very, very difficult issue. So Creative Commons in some respects was designed to help people like artists, to allow them to set the rules for how their work was going to be used. So there are a bunch of different licenses that are associated with Creative Commons. Some of them are just about attribution of the original author and allows everybody to take the original work and remix it and refix it up and do new things with it. Or there are licenses that leave the work intact but attribute, or there are licenses that allow commercial use of reuse of the work in another work. So any kind of what's the word? I'm trying to think of the actual derivative works from the original source are allowed in Creative Commons licenses. So they're incredibly valuable, but we're not actually using them as much as we ought to do, particularly in the UK, unfortunately, because there's not really a lot of knowledge about it.
Okay, thank you. And can I just clarify, it's okay to put this on YouTube?
Absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, friends, America's hardest working rock band now presents Working Man's Dead, an album of country-flavored tunes by the Grateful Dead, an album different from anything they've ever done before. Working Man's Dead, the newest from Jerry, Phil, Bob, Bill, Mickey, and Pigpen. Ready now on Warner Brothers, albums and tapes. Steal it.
Come here, Uncle John Band, by the riverside. Got some things to talk about here beside the rising.
Like Minds is continuing. It's online at the moment, and possibly there will be another one in Exeter in the autumn, but not sure about that. Best to just check what's happening online while the lockdown continues. Just one more time, how to work with YouTube, Creative Commons. It's one of those things that people don't seem to realise. You can select accreditation form of Creative Commons, and there used to be a way that could be remixed. So there was an online editor and you could combine all of those bits, but I just can't find out how to do it at the moment. So it's not obvious, but I'm hoping we can find out how that works again. The lost Grateful Dead track is called Fire on the Mountain. And now, News from the Sun. This was an art show and a sort of weekend of events a while ago. Took over all the ground floor of the Phoenix. And then I found this version of the story online. If you search for Internet Archive, the stories of J.G. Ballard, you'll find this and several other ones that I may play over this summer. And I don't know what it's about really. Gradually, I think maybe I'm just getting used to technology and I accept it. But it's a bit dystopian as well. You just get used to it. You end up working at home, talking to yourself, mumbling at a microphone. What's that about?
The Stories of J.G. Ballard. Tonight, News from the Sun. Adapted by Brian Wade. Starring Michael Ball, Geordie Johnson, and Diane D'Aquila.
In the evenings, as Franklin rested on the veranda, he would often remember Trippett and the last drive he had taken into the desert with the dying astronaut and his daughter.
What do you think, Trippett? Does it remind you of anything? Of course, I'm only going by the photographs I've seen since I've never been there. Unlike you. What was that like, being the last man to walk on the moon?
Stop it, Dr. Franklin.
Stop what?
You know my father will never answer you.
Well, that doesn't mean we should stop talking to him.
All the other doctors think his situation is hopeless. They say it's only a question of time.
Of course they do, because they believe there's no way to stop the fumes. But I think there has to be a way. All we have to do is find it. Right, Trippett?
Franklin looks at the old man with his childlike body. Trippett's blanched eyes are open behind his glasses, but his mind is set to some private time. Ursula holds his shoulders as he sways towards the windshield like a stuffed toy.
Father.
Trippett reminds Franklin of his own accelerating fugues. For a year, they have lasted little more than a few minutes each day. But in the past few weeks, they have lengthened to more than 30 minutes at a stretch. In 3 months, he will be housebound. In 6, he'll be awake for only an hour each day.
Can't you go any faster, Doctor?
I'm going 40 miles an hour.
Well, it feels like we're crawling.
It's twice the legal limit.
Don't give me that. I've seen you drive before. You're always speeding.
That's true. Especially at dusk.
So, let's go.
It makes me feel like I'm alone on a forgotten planet. Like I can keep driving forever. Of course, I have to be careful.
Franklin points at the wrecks of cars that litter the desert. Their drivers died of exposure before they could wake from their fugues.
Look out!
What? Damn it. That was close.
Didn't you see her?
I guess I was distracted by the wrecks and... Is she okay?
She's standing right in the middle of the highway, like a mannequin or something.
She'll snap out of it in an hour.
Oh, let's hope so. What are you doing?
I need to rest, Ursula. I think I'm more tired than your father.
Franklin walks towards a bank of steel mirrors laid out in a semicircle. The solar farm had been put there to provide electricity for the concrete domes of Solari 2, a solar city glimmering in the distance. A section of the collector dish lies on the ground, and Franklin can see images of himself. The sleeves of his white jacket stretching like the wings of a deformed bird.
Ursula, bring your father.
I am. What's the doctor looking at, Why don't we go find out?
He'll be able to see himself suspended in space.
We may be slow, but we always get there.
You're upside down in an inverted image, just like your last flight. What do you think of that, Trippett?
Do you see me waving at you, Dad?
In fact, we're all upside down.
What's that?
It looks like Slade's plane.
Dad, come back here!
I'll get him.
Franklin runs after the old man, tottering among the mirrors. his clenched fists pummeling the air. The old astronaut shakes like an unstuffed scarecrow, one hand pointing at the mirrors. Reflected in the metal panes are multiple images of the black aircraft, like hundreds of vultures.
Get down!
Are you all right?
Damn him!
Come on, Dad. It's okay to get up now. Come on.
Not exactly.
What do you mean?
Look, he's landing on the service road.
What's he up to now?
I'm gonna find out. What the hell are you doing here?
Doctor, careful of the wing.
What?
Take your hand off it or you'll tear the fabric.
Right.
I hope you aren't allowed to operate on your patients these days.
What do you mean?
Your hands, they're shaking up a storm.
Franklin stares at his hands, which are trembling, and then looks at Slade, who is naked, except for the aviator's goggles tied around his white hair.
Who else have you grounded lately?
No one, and I didn't ground you.
Doctor, you practically closed down the entire space program single-handed.
Don't talk nonsense, Slade.
But I'm not worried, because I've started my very own space program.
Really?
Still bothering the old man?
I'm just taking him for a drive. The speed seems to do him good. You know, you can always visit me at the clinic if the fugues get to be too much for you.
I don't have them anymore, Dr. Franklin.
What?
I found a way of dealing with them.
Well, you mean all this flying around? All you did was frighten Trippett.
You know, there is a way out, Doctor. A way out of time.
How?
So, you're interested.
Of course I am, Slade. I haven't much time left.
I know. And that's why Marion and I are going to help you.
Marion? What's my wife got to do with all this? Slade, come back here.
While Franklin walks back to the car, Slade's plane heads for the gleaming hotels of Las Vegas. Trippett sits calmly in the front seat of the car.
What did Slade want?
Do you know him?
Everybody does. Sometimes he works on our computer at Solari or he starts a fight. He's a bit crazy.
He was a trainee astronaut once.
That's right. I remember him saying that if it hadn't been for you, he would have gone to the moon.
Well, I was chairman of the medical board that rejected his application, but...
What?
The real trouble is that we went to the moon in the first place.
What do you mean?
Well, the astronauts that went on the year-long flights were the first.
Like my father.
Exactly. And we all watched them go. We went there with them. So lately, I've been wondering if this time plague is because we broke some unwritten rule.
What kind of rule?
Perhaps we committed some kind of evolutionary crime when we left our planet and headed out into space.
You mean we're being punished with the fugues?
Possibly.
But how could you ever prove any of this?
All right, now it's just a theory. Come on, let's go back to the clinic.
As they move along the highway, Franklin realizes he'll have to be careful. Slade's fugues should have become longer by now, yet somehow he's keeping them at bay. All that violent energy in his skull will one day push apart.
Dr. Franklin, listen.
What?
Trippett is sitting up and alertly peering out the window. He takes hold of Ursula's hand.
Yes, it's green here, more like Texas than Nevada. Peaceful, too. Plenty of cool trees, fields and lakes. I'd like to stop and sleep for a while. We'll come out and swim tomorrow. Would you like that, dear?
Trippett squeezes Ursula's hand with affection. But before he can speak again, a door closes within his face, and he's gone. Later, Franklin sits at his desk in the dismantled laboratory. The old astronaut's brief emergence into the world of time gives him hope. Is it possible that the fugues can be reversed? He thinks about going back to the darkened ward and taking Trippett for another drive. Could it have any connection with the appearance of Slade in his plane?
Yeah.
And how has Slade managed to elude the Fugues? When Franklin saw him last at the clinic, Slade was already suffering from fugues that lasted an hour or more.
Hi.
Marion, what are you doing here?
Thought I'd drop by for a visit.
But you never come to the clinic.
I know, but I thought I'd surprise you. How's your day been?
Interesting. I took Trippett and his daughter for a drive out in the desert.
What for?
He was there.
He was where?
Trippett was completely himself for something like 30 seconds.
Really?
Yes. Somehow I have to convince the director to keep the clinic open a little longer. I feel I have a chance now. I want to go back to the beginning and think everything through again.
Why?
Maybe the Fugues are a preparation for something, and we've been wrong to fear them. I mean, when 1 out of 100 people has the symptoms, it's virtually an epidemic.
But they're closing the clinic this month.
And out here in Nevada, there's probably another 5 out of 100 people who aren't aware they've even been affected.
They'll never let you stay and work by yourself.
We definitely know that the topography plays a part in the fugue.
Robert.
There's some kind of connection between the desert and...
Robert?
What?
I think you should call it a day.
Are you serious?
I brought my camera.
It's only the middle of the afternoon.
I like it when I can feel the sun on my body.
Marion.
Come on. I want you to take close-ups of me. Real close close-ups.
Take a look at this.
Franklin pulls out the center drawer from his desk and offers it to Marion.
This looks like some of Slade's work.
It's the last shrine he built when he was a patient here.
Why are you showing it to me?
It's the blueprint of our joint space program.
What are you talking about?
Slade said that he and you were going to help me.
I'll talk to you.
Don't you want to help me?
While Franklin stares at the contents of the drawer, he takes off his wristwatch and massages the raw skin on his forearm. Lying on surgical cotton in the drawer are a piece of lunar rock stolen from the NASA Museum in Houston, a photograph taken with a zoom lens of Marion in a hotel bathroom, her white body almost merging into the tiles of the shower stall, a faded reproduction of Dali's Persistence of Memory with its soft watches and expiring embryo, and a donor card bequeathing Franklin's brain. Franklin returns the hand of the stopwatch to 0. He has made a habit to do this every 15 minutes. That way, after the onset of a fugue, he has a reasonably exact record of its duration. He looks at the last pages of his diary. June 19th. Fugues from 8:30 to 9:11 a.m., 11:45 a.m. to 12:27 p.m., 5:15 to 6:08 p.m., 11:30 p.m. to 12:14 a.m. Total time, 3 hours. June 20th, 3 hours 14 minutes. June 21st, 3 hours 46 minutes. This gives him little more than 10 weeks, unless the fugues begin to slow down, or unless he finds the trap door through which Trippett briefly poked his head. It's not until dusk, when Franklin is driving through Las Vegas, that he realizes his usual afternoon fugue has still not occurred. He likes the abandoned gambling resort. The other doctors live close to the clinic, but Franklin stays at a motel in the city. In the evenings, he often drives down the silent strip below the facades of the vast hotels. Or he wanders for hours through the drained swimming pools. The city, which once boasted it contained no clocks, now seems to be in a fugue itself.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Franklin looks at a middle-aged man in a shabby tuxedo who stands in a parking lot staring vacantly at a dead neon sign. He looks like a retired croupier.
I'm going to take you inside or you'll freeze to death.
Save your energy, Franklin.
Slade.
He's dreaming of the big roulette wheel in the sky.
What are you doing?
What does it look like?
100 yards down the street, Slade sits in his plane, his white skin gleaming in the twilight. He gestures at a woman dressed in a fur coat to join him in his cockpit.
Leave her alone.
Your wife wants to learn how to fly.
Marion!
Come on, get in.
Where are we going?
We have to get out of here.
Oh, damn it. Marion! Don't get in the plane.
Couldn't you see him, Robert?
Of course I saw him.
He flew straight at you.
I know. I'm still picking sand out of my hair.
But you stood there, totally mesmerized. I know Slade's always fascinated you, but I think that was carrying it too far.
It was a small experiment.
Some experiment. If that propeller had been 1 foot lower.
I wanted to see what he was trying to do.
He was trying to kill you.
Franklin sits on the end of the bed, staring at the cigarette burns in the carpet. He thinks of the rotating blade that had devoured the darkness. He can still see the propeller's silver lassos spiraling out into the night as the plane disappeared among the hotels. His fugue had begun after he tripped and had lasted almost an hour. Marion is pretending the fugue had not occurred, but when Franklin came to, his skin was ice cold. What had she and Slade been doing during that lost time? Franklin imagines them together, in Marion's car, or even in the cockpit of the airplane, in front of his sightless eyes.
What are you thinking?
Nothing.
Through the open door, Franklin stares at his wife's naked body in the white, cube-like bathroom. A wet cigarette smolders in the soap dish. There are clusters of small bruises on her thighs and hips.
Are you going to be all right?
Yes.
Because I'm finding it difficult enough to cope with myself.
Don't worry. It wasn't an attack.
Good.
She sits at the dressing table and powders her shoulders. For months, they have pretended that neither of them is affected by the fugues.
I'd like you to see more of Slade.
What?
Arrange a meeting.
He was naked, you know.
She turns and looks at her husband, her left contact lens trapped under her eyelid.
That's part of his code.
What do you mean?
Slade's trying to tell me something. He needs me in a special way.
Believe me, he doesn't need you. If it hadn't been for you, he would have gone to the moon. You took that away from him.
And I can give it back to him.
How?
But we really need you to help us.
Franklin waits for her reply, but Marion sits raptly in front of the mirror, fingers retracing her upper and lower eyelids around the trapped lens. He places his hands on her shoulders, feeling the familiar, clammy skin of the fugue. He removes the contact lens from her eyeball, careful not to cut the cornea. Sitting beside her, Franklin holds her breasts in his palms, for a moment shoring up their slipping curvatures.
Craters, palm trees, and sunglasses. Yes, that's what I need. Palm trees. If I put on the palm trees, then the sun will be my friend. July 11th. A dangerous fugue today, and what may have been another attempt in my life by Slade. I set off for the clinic, but I went only a mile before going off the road. I came to in the parking lot of an abandoned shopping center, surrounded by a crowd of staring faces. In fact, they were mannequins. Suddenly, there was a volley of gunshots. Fiberglass arms and heads were flying everywhere. Total time lost, 8 hours, 17 minutes. The craters blink like eyes. The desert is a woman without mascara. She stares and stares until no one cares about our affair. July 24th. Must get out of the motel more often. A curious byproduct of the fugues is that I'm losing all sense of urgency. Sat here for the last 3 days, calmly watching time run through my fingers. I'm convinced that the fugues are a good thing, a sign that some great biological step forward is about to take place. Perhaps our sense of time is a primitive mental structure that we inherited from prehistoric man. For him, the invention of time was a way of classifying and storing the huge flood of events which his dawning mind had opened for him. Because now it's possible to imagine that everything is happening at once. That all the dark sunglasses... No. I mean, the past and the future are simultaneous. They bring news from the sun. Total time lost. 12 hours, 15 minutes. August 21st. Slade has been here. I suspect that he's been entering the apartment while I fugue. When I came out of one, there was a curious afterimage, a vague biomorphic blur that hung in the air like a photograph. My gun has been stolen, and there's a small diagram of white paint on the back of my left hand. This afternoon, someone painted the same pattern on the swimming pool floor and the palm trees. Propel me. They sprout like green propellers, shading me from the glasses of the sun. Blink, blink.
The pen snaps in Franklin's hand. When he wakes, he finds himself slumped across his diary. Torn pages lie on the carpet around his feet. Books have been scattered. His shoulders are bruised, as if someone had seized him while he was in the fugue, trying to shake him into life. It's not until Franklin goes out on the balcony that he realizes his watch has been torn off his wrist. He looks up and sees Marion, wearing a ragged fur coat, sitting behind Slade, arms around his waist. She stares down at Franklin like a startled dreamer.
Come in, Doctor.
What are you doing here?
Waiting for you. What took you so long to get here?
I had to stop every mile or so and then wait until I'd come to and I'd find myself sitting in the car. The temperature dial was my clock.
You mean you missed this?
My watch.
Come on, Doctor. We're beyond all that now, aren't we?
But it's the only way I can tell how long I've been...
Sorry. Think of yourself as a man without time.
Please, let me have it.
What do you think of your laboratory now? I've turned it into my mission control center.
Slade.
Look at all these photographs of Marion and me.
Is she here?
Don't you recognize her?
Where is she?
Right here. In each of these prints.
That's not her. These are aerial photographs of the desert taken after some earthquake.
See where the gun is pointing?
That's my gun.
And if I trace the barrel along this gully of Marion's body, it leads to only one conclusion.
Stop pointing at her.
So you do recognize her?
Hey, I don't know.
This gallery is my shrine to Marion, instead of using her like you have for the last 10 years.
I didn't use her.
Yes, you did. You've been pilfering parts from your wife and NASA in the same way.
Leave me alone.
Stealing parts for your space machine.
Go to hell.
Sorry, Doctor. I plan to go somewhere else. I'm going to fly right into the sun.
Franklin wakes up to find himself lying upside down in the overturned car, his legs sticking out through the broken windshield. He moves his arms and legs carefully. Nothing seems to be broken. Then he climbs out of the car.
I left the clinic and started back to Las Vegas. And then, everywhere I looked, Marion and Slavines fondling each other, hills looming like breasts. Within seconds, I was driving 40 miles an hour, and now it must be... I've been out of it for over 2 hours. That must be Las Vegas over there, at least 10 miles away. The white domes of Solari, too, seem closer. And what's that? Those metallic silver mirrors. If I can get to them, maybe I can signal.
Franklin sets off along the causeway between the irrigation ditches. After only 100 yards, He sinks to his knees. The sand is liquefying at his feet, sucking at his shoes. Franklin finds himself leaning against a rusted pump head. In the sky above, a vulture circles.
Go on. Get off my shoulder. You're not getting my eyes to nibble on.
Okay, I have to keep going.
If I can make it to the mirrors.
Up somewhere. Move. Wait a second. That palm tree over there sprouted up out of the sand like a green parasol.
So what? Keep moving.
Move.
Take another step. That's it.
Go on.
Now take
Move.
another one.
Wait. Now there's 2, 3, 4, 5 palm trees and a slice of blue water.
Come on, legs. Move.
Blue has become a lake. My arms are too heavy. If only I could get these damn sunglasses off my head.
Look. A valley.
A green valley with a forest of palm trees and lakes. If only. Move.
Moving. Keep moving.
The sun is everywhere. There must be 3, 8, 11, 12 sun. But how? 12 sun. Go on.
Move your arm. Yes. Shadows. Everywhere I turn, the shadows multiply.
Wait. There's a woman. Young and green. She's walking through the slice of blue water. She's waving at me. Coming. Please, legs.
My arms.
And wrap me in the coolness of your water. Blue. And I will drink forever with these 12 women.
Ursula, why is your father waving his arms?
Conducting?
Trippett's conducting? But to what? There's nothing but stones and creosote down there in the square.
Amazon.
What?
Jungle.
Ah, thank you for saving me.
Already did you.
What?
Yesterday. Sweat much. Shout much.
When I was delirious.
Cry.
But when I was out in the desert and I was in the fugue.
Here, come.
What? Oh, let me explain. When I was in the fugue, I saw. I was truly aware.
Touch.
Do you understand what that means? I saw what your father saw the day he went to the solar mirrors. Palm trees, lakes, and a green valley.
Hand give.
You want my hand? Okay. What are you putting it there for?
Touch deep.
Yes.
Mirror.
What?
My soul eye.
Wait a second. Your skin is clammy.
Bring you
And yet you can talk and walk around.
news from the sun.
Like it was nothing.
You will know it.
Tell me, what do you see?
She smiles. Franklin knows better than to disturb her. From the veranda, he can look out at the evening and see the swallows darting among the domes of Solari II. He will rest and learn the language of these birds. He takes off his wristwatch and tosses it over the railing. He is happy now to be free of time and looks forward to the moment when he too can embrace the news from the sun.
News from the Sun by J.G. Ballard. Dramatized by Brian Wade. Starring Michael Ball as Franklin, Diane D'Aquila as Marion, Jordy Johnson as Slade, Patricia Vanstone as Ursula, and Angela Fusco as the narrator, with Jack Mather as Trippett. Casting consultant was Beth Russell, with original music by Timothy Clark. The series script editor is Sandra Rabinovich. Recording engineer, Glenn McLaughlin, with sound effects by Kathy Perry. Production assistant, Evelyn Chow. News from the Sun was produced and directed at Studio G in Toronto by series executive producer William Lane. Next week, having a wonderful time.
Yes, she says that, but it may not be next week. It'll be sometime soon. Having a wonderful time. As I say, a really great summer event drama. This is Smooth and Turrell again, Do It. And then, through a miracle of production, Tony Braxton, the same title for the song.
Do it till the sun comes up.
106.8 FM.
Now, a Jonathan Joney remix of LOVE by Black. We found this through Twitter on We Not Know, WENOTNO, which the show's not going to happen at the moment because of the lockdown and because we can't get in the studio, John and myself at the same time. So there is a very short playlist on YouTube. We Not Know June 20, which this is one of the tracks.
Say for all around the world, say for all around the world, say it all around the world, say all we need is love, all around the world, all we need is love. All around world. All around the world.
This section is about the Commons, Creative Commons as well, and the MOOC, and informal education seems to turn out to be. There's two clips from a FutureLearn MOOC about the unbundled university, and then the last one is those are both repeats, because this MOOC has occurred 3 times now, and so a lot of the information is from last year, 2019. But the ideas in it are still very relevant, except that there has been more of a move online, bit of a sudden dash to it because of the lockdowns. But a lot of the theory is more relevant now to what more universities are doing. So the third interview is with Martin Weller from a Pivot Online course on edX. So stay listening for that. It'll be about a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes time. But the first two are with Robin. Well, the first one. Let's start with that. The first one, Robin Mansell, who is Professor of New Media and the Internet at LSE, and she explains what imaginaries are and about the commons as imagined.
Robin, thanks so much for agreeing to participate in our MOOC. I really appreciate it. I think it's going to be great to have your voice joining in, and we've been following your work and seeing the intersections with what we're doing. So it's really, really nice to be chatting to you.
Well, I hope I can say something helpful.
I'm sure you can. As you know, I'll just remind you, our MOOC is about the intersection between digitization, unbundling, and marketization in higher education. And we've been talking to decision makers and academics and students in England and in South Africa, and looking at the relationship with private providers as well, to get a sense of how teaching and learning provision is changing. So the reason I thought it'd be really interesting to talk to you is because you've written and spoken quite a lot about the 2 social imaginaries of technology in society and in higher education. And our interest is in those imaginaries. And as you've said yourself, the dominant imaginary is the marketized imaginary, and the alternative is a commons-based imaginary. So maybe you can just start by describing each of those imaginaries and how they differ and if they have anything in common.
Yes, I see them when I guess I should start by saying what I mean by an imaginary. So I draw very much on Charles Taylor's notion of the social imaginary, which in everyday discourse basically means how do different people, different stakeholders understand how things work in the world? Basically, what are the fundamental principles or rules or practices which make for the most effective way of getting on in a collaborative way in the world? And he argues that historically and now, there's always a dominant discourse or a dominant social imaginary, and then there may be one or more subsidiary ones. And what I have thought a lot about and written about is, in a sense, 2 rather polarized ideal types, if you like. So in one sense, there is the dominant imaginary, as you've just said, which focuses very much on the marketplace and on the commercialization of data and information and even knowledge, as some people would say. And at the other extreme, there is a commons-based or far more collaborative and often non-market approach to working with data, information, and knowledge. In between, I think I've also argued that there can be lots of hybrids and lots of intersections. And as I said, these are ideal types. And although those who are very neoliberal in their orientation might favor, if you like, pure market model, there's almost no such thing as a pure market model. It's always a blurring of boundaries. Usually, and almost always, especially in the field of education, the state becomes involved in one way or another, either to fund technology and platforms or to fund institutions of higher education, and they have some influence over where the market plays a role. Similarly, at the other end of the spectrum, in a commons model, there are lots of startup initiatives to allow people to participate in online learning, both formal and informal.
So could you tell us a bit more about the commons-based imaginary and what it assumes and how it works and what interests it serves? And also, why do you think it's less dominant at the moment?
Well, I think if we think about what 21st century capitalism is about, it is very much about extracting value, economic value from information. And in that sense, that it becomes the dominant model. We do live in a global capitalist economy with some variations in different parts of the world. But nonetheless, the notion that the highest goal is to generate economic value from the processing of information and knowledge is so entrenched as a social imaginary that it just by its nature, for that reason, it's dominant. It's not dominant because it's the only way to process and work with information and knowledge, but because we live in a capitalist environment. As far as the commons-based approach, I'm certainly not the originator of this notion. When we think about people like Elinor Ostrom and her notions of the commons, and also in the IT area, Benkler and others, core to their notion is that there is always collaborative impulses in society. And there have always been people who have attempted to coordinate their actions through non-market relationships. And so the commons is often seen as far more conducive to privileging values of trust, sharing of information, building and taking initiative in a very flexible way, without necessarily having the need for the market to play a role in a transaction kind of way.
So this is based on collaboration and the notion of sharing resources, is that right?
Sharing resources of all kinds. And the literature on commons-based activity is enormous, and it covers nearly every segment of activity in the world. There is no area, in a sense, where commons-based activity cannot be developed. There are questions as to whether commons-based activity is the best way of certainly generating sufficient resources for populations, for citizens, to enable them to live healthy lives and to address their well-being in all its different dimensions. But that gets into the details of when commons-based approaches work best and when they don't.
And what about for teaching and learning? Can you describe or envisage what a commons-based approach to teaching and learning might look like? Teaching and learning provision?
I think, as I said to you, that teaching and learning provision in terms of a specialism of my own is not something that I have researched in depth, but I have done some research on the way in which alternatives to the market-based platforms that are being developed for online learning are emerging. And I think there you see a very strong tension between the commodified marketized approach, which means the big platforms which are there to make money by hosting online learning of one kind or another, and alternatives to that, which in some ways struggle, when you talk about formal learning, struggle to find a place in the world, mainly because all forms of online learning at the end of the day do require the investment of money in both technology and in the people who develop the content, and on enabling the learners to have access to those online platforms and to have their own equipment at their end. So there is also a citizen or user or learner cost at the other end. They must pay fees or something. When they're free, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So somewhere, someone must be investing in the capability to allow these online learning platforms to take place. I think it's really important also to distinguish between formal learning, as we think about it in higher education, and the massive numbers of opportunities there are for much more informal learning, which is not about hierarchies of qualifications, but actually learning about practice and applying that in people's everyday lives. So I think there's differences between those two types of online learning. In terms of the characteristics of the more commons-based approaches, they often rely on open hardware or open software as a basis, which means that they are collaboratively produced in the first place. They often rely on voluntary contributions, and there are questions about how or who takes authoritative judgments about the quality of that information that's available to learners. So I think these are all issues, none of which say that the open or commons-based approach is wrong. But I think the point I would like to make is that all of them require some system of establishing norms and principles about how they should operate. And that's where it gets tricky, because new hierarchies emerge within those commons-based approaches, which mean that authoritative individuals or experts or groups come to define what is good as opposed to not good knowledge or information for learning.
The second extract from the FutureLearn MOOC about unbundled universities is with Susan Robertson, who's Professor of Education at the University of Cambridge. Stay listening to this. That it sort of describes where informal education could be a better or more likely area for forms of commons or the MOOC or mutual activity of various kinds.
At the current time, we're seeing some emerging business models between private companies and universities that are kind of reminiscent of the traditional public-private partnerships, and I think people feel that they are problematic in the educational space. And what we're not seeing is any kind of commons-based approach. So there's no commons business models emerging, whilst the open educational resource movement is very large, and there are open educational resource universities. They're not the conversations that are happening in universities. Can you comment on why you think the kind of market-driven business models are predominant over the commons-based approach?
I think we, so the question of, do we have a market model or do we have a commons model? And perhaps the public sector model was, there was always commercial activity around the public sector model, but perhaps that is a little bit closer to the commons model. This idea of governing from within. You might have seen old, forms of senates and professorial governance and so on as being something in the direction of that model. However, I'm well aware that there are cooperative models, for example. There are also some quite interesting other models, universities of the peoples. And to be honest, I don't see why, we've linked digital technologies to growing inequalities, but we can actually use digital technologies. Coursera, for example, which is one of the big massive open online course providers, used in this case South Africa and the thirst for higher education as a way of thinking about the possibilities for social equity using digital technologies. But we have moved into an era in the developed economies where what drives the economic development model for the developed economies is this idea of a services sector. Okay? So let me just use several examples. In the Australia, okay, Australia, when it calculates the value in GDP terms for goods and services, not just services, but goods and services. Education now sits behind iron ore. Okay? That's a very big, very, very big industry. Okay? And there's significant money to be made in that sector from, let's say, the traditional providers selling education services, having branch campuses, and you'll also have some of the for-profits who've actually moved in and operate kind of around the world. One company I've been studying reasonably closely would be Laureate. So they have something in the order of about 1 million students enrolled in about 27 countries and so on. So this is an attractive model in many ways because this is what we mean by a services economy. Governments need a services economy. Governments actually calculate the value. And in the case of the UK, I think it's in the order of something like 18 billion that comes through. So this is significant amounts of money that is actually coming into that sector. So there's now a dynamic at work, and what I think is, rather than think of an alternate sector it would be, could we begin to think of all the different ways in which the idea of open and commons, let's say certain kinds of infrastructure, resources for students and their learning, I think that's a more viable way forward. So if we think of the ways in which the university is being unbundled, and then if we think of the different ways in which universities, for example, might come together, and I know examples in the United States where, let's say, the state universities, Wisconsin is one that I know who's collaborating with Pennsylvania and others, and running with these open source, open access platforms. They're pooling their resources, and the view essentially is that the materials, the resources for students will be open, the administrative infrastructures would enable sharing and so on. So in an environment of constrained resources, and we see this across many, many different countries, and not only in, let's say emerging or low-income countries or middle-income countries, I think all higher education sectors, even in places like Germany, are being pressured. In the case of Germany, it's the cost of pensions that are putting pressure on the sector. But we rather than think of this versus that, if we think of bundling the university up in different ways for ourselves, in ways in which we're building as much open access, open resource, openness and accountability into that rebundling, then I think we might end up with something potentially different. But it seems to me, a conversation to be had, and it may be the kind of conversation that the kind of research your team have been involved in could actually set in train.
The third clip is an interview with Martin Weller. There's also an interview as part of the MOOC, the FutureLearn MOOC on unbundled universities. But this one comes from Making Sense of Online, a YouTube weekly summary of a course, Pivoting Online, which is much more recent. Martin Weller is Professor of Educational Technology at the Open University, and the interview is by George Siemens, who is Executive Director of Link Lab. You can find Link Lab on YouTube, based at the University of Texas at Arlington.
Great, and a final point, I just want to hear from you. Again, you've touched on this a couple of times, and I just want to share with others. I know you have a book that's just out. You've got numerous books that can be freely accessed around the experience of teaching online, and particularly your experience with educational technology. And there's recent work on sort of the 25-year landscape view of what that has been like in the education sector, and we'll certainly include those links following your video in the course. But you've also been heavily involved in open education resources and the idea that there are curricular materials that are available that you can use often or generally without fee to support the learning experiences of your students. So maybe you could touch a little bit on that aspect. Certainly your 25 years of ed tech overview and OERs as well in this space.
Yeah, thank you for the plug, George. I don't want to be opportunistic. Now is the time to read my book, but I do think in some ways, I think you want to avoid Schadenfreude, but there is a kind of thing of like, often online learning has been dismissed, and instructional design units, ed tech units have been moved around in universities and not supported well, and you kind of feel like some of that's coming home to roost now. So, and I do think a broader understanding of where ed tech has been might have put us in a different place now. So yes, you do need to get my book on all of your vice chancellors and principals' desks. But I think it does sort of show that. Despite it having been around for 25 years plus, like lots of people are still coming to it for the first time now, so we hadn't really sort of put in place the kind of resilience and robustness in the higher ed sector, I think, that should have been there. And in terms of use of OER, I think that, this might be a really good opportunity for OER to kind of show their usefulness, because there are lots of MOOCs around and people are running those, you're running one. But often MOOCs aren't adaptable. The good thing about OER, so I pointed some people, so for example, at the University of the Open Learn, we have an existing course which is take your teaching online, ideal. And so that's already there. But the thing is, because it's Creative Commons licensed, it's available in download formats, and that people can take it and adapt it for their institutions. I think that's the key part here, is not so much necessarily individuals taking it, but each institution taking stuff and adapt it to their particular needs. And I think this is where the reuse will sort of come into play quite a lot, I think.
Very well. Thanks very much, Martin, for taking time out on such short notice to share your insight with the students in our program. I think especially we don't know how long we're here. I think that's one of the things that's interesting. And the longer we're here, obviously, the deeper the expertise individuals can develop. And by here, I mean in this digital learning, remote teaching, whatever space that's been foisted upon many faculty. And the one thing I've found, especially as I've had conversations with faculty now moving into this space, is many aren't aware of just how rich the existing research base is, how many of the questions they're facing have already been evaluated, assessed, and researched going back 30, 40, or even 50 years in some instances. So I certainly appreciate you spending a bit of time with us, and we'll share your resources with the participants in the course, and I'm sure they'll find them as useful and insightful as I have. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, George. Good luck, everyone.
There will be a play in a future show based in a cafe somewhere near a campus in about 2025, looking at blended learning, or a blended cafe 25, or blend cafe, #blend cafe 25, or one word, should find something about it. Possibly Waitrose opposite a campus cafe, so there's a bit of communication going on. But essentially just looking at why we need student accommodation and more buildings on the campus when the technology would work okay for something a bit more mixed up, but less demanding on the city resource. Not exactly sure how it's going to work, but the Storyteller is quite interested, and I think it might involve people from the Wild Show and We Not Know as well, because we have quite a lot of cafe planning meetings when the shows are working. So we'll see how that works out in future shows.
Phonic FM 106.8 FM.
Now, a story about a grasshopper from David Heathfield, part of the Facebook group A Latter Day Decameron for Doomsdays. You can also find it on YouTube.
It was high summer, and Grasshopper was singing as he always did, rubbing his wings and legs together, playing the most beautiful music. "Ant," cried Grasshopper to one of the ants carrying grain along the trail, "you're working too hard. Come and dance. Relax." "No," said Ant. "We, together, are collecting food for our store for the winter. Summer will soon be over. There will be nothing to eat. If you don't collect food, Grasshopper." "There's no time for that," said Grasshopper. "There's a time of plenty now. Let us enjoy ourselves." But Ant went on in the trail. Grasshopper sang and played all summer long. But now the winter came, the snow fell and lay thick on the ground. There was no more food for Grasshopper. He had collected nothing. Grasshopper grew hungrier and weaker. So cold! Grasshopper remembered what Ant had told him. Grasshopper found the ants' nest and called, "Ants, ants, let me in. I am so cold and hungry." The ants opened the nest. The ant that he had met before invited him in. "Eat, Grasshopper. Stay warm." Grasshopper was no longer hungry. "And what can I do for you?" "Now it's your time to work," said the ants. "We have done our work. You've eaten from our store of plenty. Now play for us." And Grasshopper rubbed his wings and legs together and played his beautiful music, and the ants danced. We all need a little music and entertainment in our lives. The story of the grasshopper and the ant I learned from Johannes Do-hoon Kim from Korea. I've also heard this story told by Rebecca Lemaire. Today it's Sunday, the 14th of June 2020. I'm telling you this story from St John in the Wilderness in Exmouth, and it's a breath of fresh air.
No more wondering why he ain't calling you back lately. You don't get along. You're sick and tired of it all. You can't take it no more. No need to say you feel some kind of way. Just do what you need to do. Do what you need to do. He ain't gonna change. If you take him back, it's gonna be the same. Just do what you need to do. Do what you need to do. Just do it, do it, do it, do it. Yeah, yeah. Do what you need to do. Do what you need to do. And even God don't understand why you forget him so many times. He got you back and forth and round and round and up and down again. No, you'll never win. You gotta stop pretending. No need to say you feel some kind of way. Just do what you need to do. Do what you need to do. He ain't gonna change. If you take him back, it's gonna be the same. Just do what you need to do. Do what you need to do. I know it's gonna hurt.
That was Tony Braxton for JD, who expects me to play some hospital radio. And the next track is a request from Chris Norton.
I would do anything for love. I'd run right into hell and back. Oh, I would do anything for love. I'll never lie to you, and that's a fact. But I'll never forget the way you feel right now. And I would do anything for love. Oh, I would do anything for love. Oh, I would do anything for love. But I won't do that. Oh, no, I won't do that. Some days it don't come easy. Some days it don't come hard. Some days it don't come at all. And these are the days that never end. Some nights you're breathing fire, and some nights you're coughing ice. Some nights you're like nothing I've ever seen before or will again. And maybe I'm crazy. Oh, it's crazy and it's true. I know you can save me, no one else can save me now but you. As long as the planets are turning, as long as the stars are burning, as long as your dreams are coming true, you better believe it, that I would do anything for love. And you know it's true, and that's a fact. Oh, I would do anything for love, and there'll never be no turning back. But I'll never do it better than I do it with you. So long, and I would do anything for love. Oh, I would do anything for love. I would do anything for love. But I won't do that. No, I won't do. I would do anything for love, anything you've been dreaming of. But I just won't do that. I would do anything for love, anything you've been dreaming of. But I just won't do that. I would do anything for love, anything you've been dreaming of. But I just won't do. But I'll never stop dreaming when you have a night.